He was moving.
You can go up.
Sun moved.
Tell him later that you want to take his picture.
Good evening, friends.
Good evening, sir.
For those of you who don't know me, my name is Carl Ford. I'm the chair of the Board of Trustees of Old Pine Farm Land Trust. And welcome. Thank you for joining us. Our program tonight is a homegrown expert. Brett, all through his high school, and I don't know actually when he began, but has been an active part of the land trust and a part of the life of the Willoughby's family, who were the founders of the Old Pine Farm Land Trust. Brett went off and left us for 4 years. We saw him occasionally, and spent his time at the College of the Atlantic in Maine, and received a bachelor's degree. And I don't know for sure, what was your major?
Human ecology. Human ecology.
Human ecology.
Human ecology, okay.
Whatever that.
And after graduation, or at the time of graduation, Brett applied for and received a fellowship, the Watson Foundation Fellowship, which allowed him to spend 12 months traveling around the world doing a special study, which he selected. I will let him tell you about it. So here he is.
Well, thank you, Carl, and thank you everybody else who came out, and everybody who let me go away for a year. Remember those first 4 years that Carl was talking about, where I periodically appeared back in New Jersey. You can't go around the world without knowing you have good people back home who want you to come back. So it was always good to know that I had family and friends here who would welcome me back and let me tell my story to them. So the fellowship that I received was from the Watson Foundation, and they support, the year that I went, there were 40 of us who were sent off to spend a year out of our country on our own, pursuing whatever interest we had chosen was our passion. And I chose river deltas, primarily communities along river deltas. So for a year, I lived on the coast, near the coast, on the water, near the water, in the water, yeah, you know what. And this is just the tip of it. We'll scratch the year in the next 40, 45 minutes. And I'll tell you about some of the places that really made a difference in my life and taught me amazing lessons, and just were unbelievably inspiring and heartbreaking or joyous. And the place we're going to start is up here. This is in northern Canada, about 50 miles from the Arctic Ocean. We were flying over, me and a couple of researchers who I had met at a campground who had gone to the Arctic to do research without bringing a botanist along, and I happened to pretend that I was a botanist. And they took me out with them to do some work. So we were flying over tundra here, where there's just hundreds and hundreds of lakes and rivers below you. And this meander struck out to me because this is what I was looking for in the year. You know, places where you can, there was places that were shaped like this. I mean, this is what South Jersey looks like when you fly over it, between all the houses. These are the way the rivers move. So this is that delta. This is the Mackenzie River Delta, not far from where that last photo was taken. That photo is in the tundra. This is just off of where this one big river spills out into the Arctic Ocean. And the brown, that's the main river, so it's full of silt and sediment. And then these lakes that you see are just fill the delta. And they're clear because they're about 10 feet higher than the river. So when I was there in midsummer, when it's daylight all the time, the sun never goes down, it's just continuous 24-hour daylight, the rivers were really low. So all you had was water flowing through the rivers, and it was full of the sediment. And the lakes had dropped. So in the spring, those lakes are underwater. And the reason they get clear is because the water level drops, the lakes have no more flow, and then the sediment drops out. And they make this just amazing landscape to fly in over. This is where I started the year, flying into this place. It's a little village on the banks of this river that I moved into in mid-August, or mid-July of 2009. And you can see the lakes. Sort of, there's one. This is the one river bridge right here. Yeah. So it's incredible. Like this branch here, the river, the very like river-shaped branch that goes down to Nuvik. Nuvik was the village I lived in, and one day after doing a little work with these researchers from the tundra, I wanted to get out into the delta, and everyone kept telling me, "You're not allowed. Like bears will eat you. It's winter time. Like don't do this. This is a bad idea." But then someone else told me, like, "Oh, it's a great idea. Just go get a canoe and paddle upstream for 3 days, and some guy will let you work for him cutting fish." And I was like, "Well, that sounds better than don't go." So I got a canoe off some guys who had paddled down from central Canada to the Arctic, and I set out into the delta here. And went upstream. You can see this delta is just this river's moving, pulling down these trees off the banks, and just completely wiping out the landmass here, just continuously. The landscape changes every day as well. And it's the kind of place where there's natural gas on the ground, so you have all these southern mineral and energy explorers coming and taking away this gas and oil. And you have overlaying that permafrost. The ground's frozen solid, even in the summertime when it gets really hot. The ground's frozen solid. But when the water comes through, it breaks it all up, and you get things like mammoth tusks that wash out. You know, stuff that hasn't even become, the ground has never even become like it hasn't turned into stone or nothing become fossilized. It's just covered things that were walking around 1,000 years ago. Yeah. So it's an incredible place just to see that. And I'll come back to that aspect of it, because this is something that hasn't really changed here. Though the delta is very dynamic and the water is always moving through, you have a system that's pretty young. It's 10,000 years or so old. And it's really, it gets exposed to change really quickly. You can see this is just a house. It's probably 100 years old, and it's falling in the banks. And again, so I paddled upstream. I passed a lot of those kind of camps. Most of these camps have been abandoned, and I was told, keep going. There's some guy. He's out there. This guy and his wife. They're fishing. They'll help you. They're nice. Along the way, I ran into some of this. These are footprints that are bigger than my feet in length. These are grizzly bears that are very, very big. But they didn't bother me, which was good. And I got here, and I moved into this house, the little canvas tent with this guy. This is Robert. He was an assistant for this older couple that I was told would let me work for them. And to put in perspective, I showed up after 3 days, and I wasn't sure that it had been 3 days because the sun hadn't gone down, and I was alone, and I wasn't sure it had been 3 days. And I said, "Is this so-and-so's camp?" And they said, "Yeah, it is." They said, "Well, where'd you come from?" I said, "Well, downstream." They're like, "That's silly, why would you go up like this?" They said, "Well, what do you want?" I said, "Well, I was wondering if I could work." And they said, "Well, yeah, there's your bed." And then 3 days later, they asked me who I was. So I moved in with Robert, him and I started working. And what we would do is we would work these fish lines, these big nets in the river, pulling out these big fish. At this time, there was only a woman named Alice who was working there. It was her camp. And her family had fished in this spot for probably now it's like 700 years continuously in this one spot. And it used to be a fairly big tribal village, and now it's become mostly a one-family camp in the Delta. So they go out for a few weeks at a time, in the summer especially, and gather fish. And historically, they would gather these fish to feed their dog teams, and they would supply fuel for the winter for the dog teams and people. That's no longer completely necessary. Gasoline, ATVs are sort of the modern way to get around, and power boats. But they still do it, and because the no one's doing it, they have a pretty strong role in the community culture and the native culture up there, because they can sell fish to other elders for ceremonies and things. But besides the fact that we weren't making fish to supply our dog team for the winter, we were doing things in basically the same way they would have been done when Alice's great-grandfather was alive. And she's about 88, as far as I can tell. And you see this is the trap line down, the fish line, which goes out to the river here. And most of the delta, the tundra, you saw in that first photo, there was no trees. I mean, everything was this big, the vegetation. But the delta, because the water is coming from central Canada, it warms the ground. So you get these big trees that can grow because the permafrost goes down deeper. So you have a really...
What kind of fish?
Well, they're these big old, they're called whitefish, they call them. I don't know if they are, but they're like this big. 25-pound, 30-pound fish. A lot of pike, pickerel type fish. This is again going for water. We would go out
to drink, to get drinking water, we would leave the river and go up into these lakes, and you take that